That's all your sport for now. Now on the BBC News Channel, here's Gavin Esler with the papers.
Hello and welcome to our review of the Sunday morning papers. With me are the journalist Yasmin Alibi-Brown and the political commentator James Miller. So let's have a look at the front pages. The Sunday Express leads with news of Theresa May's upcoming meeting with President Trump. The global protests against the new president make the front page of The Observer. The Mail on Sunday claims the Prime Minister is set to use her meeting with President Trump to tell him to stop insulting women. While the Sunday Telegraph says the President is planning a new deal with Britain to reduce trade barriers and reach a joint position on NATO. Sunday Times leads on a story that Downing Street covered up a nuclear weapons mishap which apparently led to a Trident missile veering off course during a test firing near Florida and heading towards the United States. So let's get started, and we'll get started with the Sunday Express. Theresa May is my Maggie. Prime Minister will be first world leader to meet the President. Special relationship to be as close as Reagan and Thatcher. Trump requests lavish state visit hosted by the Queen. James, what do you make of it?
There's a certain lack of imagination, isn't there? And, it's Theresa May and a right-wing right-wing American president. It'd be like Reagan and Maggie all over again. It does suggest a lack of imagination, and I suspect it won't be exactly like that. It
doesn't sound, I mean, this is not Reagan and this is not Maggie. I mean, it's just it's clearly two different people with different problems.
I think I might end up missing Margaret Thatcher by the time this period is over, honestly. But
that would be a first.
It would be a first, and I think, listening to Theresa May's speech, I thought, my God, she's really hard right, actually, in some ways, which Margaret Thatcher never dared to be quite that way. She wasn't so in your face. But one of the things that in this Express story, it's all about wanting to go to the palace. Yes. He's like a little boy, isn't he? He wants a bigger party, a bigger reception, more than Obama had.
But this is where, actually, the Queen will do the nation's business and will welcome him, whether it's Buckingham Palace or Balmoral or, I don't know, golf at St Andrews or something. The Queen will fly the flag for Britain, won't she?
She will. She'll do what she always does, which is, sort of nothing in a way. I mean, she does a lot, but publicly, of course, it'll be very level and all the rest of it. The question, of course, is the rest of them. Will Prince Charles meet with him? Prince Charles, who is a big climate change I was going to say climate change champion. He's not a champion of climate change, but he's a champion of it as a cause that needs to be tackled. Donald Trump, of course, doesn't believe in it.
Well, it's off the White House agenda, isn't it? If you look at the White House 6 points.
He said it doesn't exist. It isn't happening,
Well, it's a plot by China, but that it's going to be an awfully interesting meeting. Let's move on, because I was struck by the Mail's headline: "Cut out your sexist insults, Mr. President. Theresa May prepared to use first summit to tackle Trump's abuse of women." Well, good luck with that. You're maybe thinking that would be a very tough one.
First of all, I don't know how much of this is too much imagination or not, or wishful thinking or whatever, but I don't know if she can, and if she does, good. But do you really think at their first meeting, when they're all kowtowing to him now, of course, for this trade deal, she's going to say that? I doubt it very much.
I hope so. I hope so. If you're a grown-up faced with a bully who is offensive to women, if you're a woman or a man, you really ought to walk into that room and say, "Please don't do that. And here's why you shouldn't."
Can I just point out that he got half the women's vote, half the women of America who voted for Donald Trump, more or less.
That's
53%.
That's why I'm fascinated by this headline, actually, because the Mail, and this is the Mail on Sunday, is not a champion of women's rights, shall we say, as a title. It is, but it has a lot of women readers. So they clearly think that their readers are offended by Trump's sexist insults, whereas, as you say, a lot of women in America weren't so offended that they couldn't bring themselves to vote for him. So I'm just intrigued by the fact that the Mail obviously thinks their readers, who are, if they were in America, would perhaps be Trump voters,
that's very interesting, yes.
Offended by it. So is there something
very interesting point going on
also, remember, the Mail on Sunday is a very different paper from the Mail. And like the Mail on Sunday was for Remain, and the Mail was for Brexit. So maybe they're kind of, they have a different place they're coming from.
And I suppose we're going to hear this tired phrase about the special relationship, which every British diplomat who's ever worked in Washington that I've ever talked to can't stand that phrase. They point out there is a special relationship, but there's a special relationship between the United States and Canada, or with Mexico, or with Japan, or even with Israel. So it's not, you know, we've got to be quite careful about how we use that phrase.
Sure, but Theresa May is going to be the first foreign leader to meet him on Friday, we now know. So, I mean, that is a coup. That does...
That's Mr. Farage. Mr. Farage will take all the credit for it.
I think the British ambassador in Washington might take quite a bit of credit, actually. I think he will get that within the diplomatic service, won't he? Because he's managed to
and Theresa May's team went over a few weeks ago, didn't they?
Let's get on to the substance of this, because beyond the Theresa May is my Maggie and cut out the insults, we've got the Sunday Telegraph, which has got kind of the substance of what we think is going to go on. Trump's new deal for Britain. President's team work on deal as they get down to business despite global protests. A deal to reduce barriers between American and British banks through a new passporting system. A US-UK working group to identify barriers to trade. And a joint statement on defence. But the context has got to be America first, hasn't it?
It is. And that was the most frightening thing about his inauguration speech. That if anyone, any other nation, thinks that he cares at all about anybody else, I don't know what they're thinking. And there is also this small problem that we're still in the EU. So these two can't go around signing agreements until we're out.
Or formally negotiating even agreements for at least 2 years
against the
from
rules.
Article
It's
50,
against the rules. But of course this man does not understand anything about international relations, rules, you know, how the whole world works.
But a warm personal relationship, if that's what Theresa May is able to establish, or at least a friendly one, is actually quite important in politics as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen over the last few days does suggest that Trump might be actually completely crazy. I mean, you know, he's still a bit of a mystery. We don't know, is he just crackers, or is it some sort of big plan to distract people with one thing while he's talking about another? Theresa May, for whatever you may think of her politics, is a grown-up, you know, and so it might indeed be very helpful,
very serious person
to have some sort of grown-up near him who has his ear and can possibly try and have some sort of control of him.
Well, she's a woman, but I bet you but I just thought him dancing with his wife. If you ever wanted to see how his wife seemed to be curling away, so Miss May, do not dance with him, even if there is an occasion.
He's not Ed Balls, let's put it that way, in terms of the dancing.
There's so many ways he's not Ed Balls, to be fair.
There's so many ways he's not Ed Balls. But I think another interesting point over the past few days is this sensitivity to things which other people might think are less interesting, like the size of the inauguration crowds. I mean, we've seen the pictures, but we're now being told that it was the most viewed inauguration in history. Well, maybe on television, but certainly the crowds looked a lot thinner, didn't they?
They
a few years ago?
did. But he hates it. He's a bully in every way. But if anybody criticises him or what he thinks he's achieved, then there is this real anger that erupts out of him or his team, you know, and they're not able. I mean, they have controlled messages for long enough. I think we may be now entering a time when there is proper coverage of what this man is, and people are less scared of his tweets and of his bullying.
But Sean Spicer, the White House press advisor, or whatever you call him, spokesman, he's made it clear we will hold the media to account.
But this is what I mean by, is it all part of a plan? I mean, you know, quite clearly the crowd was not as big as previous crowds. He says it was. Now, is that because he is mad, which is a bit of a worry if he's got the nuclear codes? Is it because he wants to talk about the size of the crowd whilst he's trashing Obamacare behind the scenes? I mean, is that what it's about? Well, I don't know, and I think a lot of us don't know.
He wants to control everything, including the story. And that's what we now have ahead of us.
So he's controlling the story by talking about the crowd instead of talking about Obamacare.
No, talking up the crowd. So he wants reality to be his reality. And that's the frightening thing. I know.
Well, you may think so, but there are millions of Americans who distrust the so-called mainstream media. They don't regard it as reflecting their views, and they look at Donald Trump's tweets and they think this is the real deal.
Yeah.
First of all, I have a big problem with the term mainstream media. I don't think there is mainstream media. There's media and there's wackos on the internet writing all sorts of nonsense. I don't like this mainstream media.
And also, we have to admit that the mainstream media, we all hate each other anyway, because we're all very competitive. So
Sometimes.
the idea that we all get together.
Sometimes. But it doesn't really matter in a way, that, because the bottom line is there was only so many people there at the inauguration on Friday. It doesn't matter who's reporting it, it's a fact. You know,
But
there are, I mean, some things you can argue about in politics,
breath,
but that was
when
a
he
fact.
was campaigning, he said what he said about Muslims and, you know, having a directory, and then the next day he got up and said, I like Muslims. Muslims are very good people. You know, some of my best friends, I think, use that term. So which one is the real Donald Trump?
It's the I never mocked a reporter with disabilities.
Oh.
Yes, you did. We've all seen it. I mean,
Yes.
this is a fact. You know, you cannot argue about it. We've seen it. You did it.
Right, let's move on to another crowd, because The Observer has hundreds of thousands of US women unite to vote defiance over Trump, and it wasn't just in the United States, actually it wasn't just women. But I have to say, what's the point? Does this change anything at all?
I do think it's important. I do think it's important because if we're not going to let us get into the situation of a new kind of neo-fascism, you know, a different kind, but a new kind of neo-fascism, one way or another, individually and as collectives, we have to resist or at least speak out, because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen to the world, the whole world, not just the United States. So these are do you remember this happened during the Iraq War? On one day, the world came out. They couldn't stop the war, but nobody's ever forgotten that. And one of the reasons Blair ended up where he did was because of that coming out against the war. So it's important.
How do you see it, James?
Well, as one who was on the march in London yesterday, yeah, I don't know how much it achieves. But A, it makes you feel better being amongst like-minded people. B, I was struck by the number of men who, either on the tube or on the sidelines of the march, who were saying exactly that in a very aggressive way to these women, going, why are you doing this? It's not going to change anything. You're ridiculous. Which I just found, I mean,
Really?
I shouldn't be surprised by, but I was surprised by. Because no, it's not going to change the Trump inauguration, the fact that Trump's president. But it does send out some sort of message, either to him or to like-minded people,
And
that you're
he-
not alone, that there are, you know, there is hope if you, depending on how you feel about, how strongly you feel about a Trump presidency.
But also he's thin-skinned, remember. He hates the idea that people don't like him.
Well, yeah.
He's not one of those who gets off on it.
That's part of the crowd thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because more people turned out for the Women's March than turned out for his
Yeah.
inauguration, we would
So
possibly
it's-
think.
It'll affect him. It will affect him.
It's also, I think, worth pointing out that it's a very strange splash for the Observer. A Sunday paper should be putting a news story on the front that takes something forward or is exclusive. And they've just reported on, not even the British March, but the American March, which we all know happened because it was on the news last night.
But I do
It's a
think
favour.
that at the top of the front page of the paper, the leader line, this summarises absolutely clearly what many of us feel has happened.
Let's move on to the Sunday Times, because they've got an exclusive, which is a really good story. Number 10 covered up Trident missile fiasco. It was a missile that was supposed to head east towards West Africa and actually went west towards Florida, but thank goodness it didn't land on anybody.
Can you imagine?
I mean, there was no nuclear tip or anything on it, but it was clearly a malfunction.
Yeah, and the nuclear kind of heads of all of this have said, you know, it's all very safe and we know what we're doing. But we will never know if it happened, how it happened, I don't think.
But I just think that the contrast with the Observer front page as a newspaper story, that's a Sunday story. It's exclusive and it's important. If there's nuclear missiles going wonky, that
and
matters.
it's something we'll be reporting tomorrow and the next day,
and
because
I
there'll be
mean,
an inquiry into this.
the
and
Women's March was
Commons
in-
will want to know what went wrong.
I mean, the Women's March was important, but we've seen it on the news. We know about it. This is actually a big story.
Now, actually, I thought one of the most interesting stories of the day was way inside the Sunday Times. 10% of people do not own a single book. What do you make of that?
I believe it, and I find it terribly depressing, especially as now libraries are closing down, you know, and I just find it really sad that there are people, I know people, I've got some rich friends who've got they have artificial books. So
the artificial
Yes,
books?
they do.
Well, so they look like books,
They
but
look
you
like
can't...
leather-bound books, but
Wow.
they're not.
Right.
So that's where we are.
I'm suspicious of it, to be honest. It might be fake news.
You think it's fake news?
It's a PR survey. I really want
PR
10 people
surveys.
don't have a single book. But if it's true, as you say, with the fake books, the worst thing is if people haven't got books, you can't go around their house and judge them on what they read. It's like people with these e-readers on the train. You can't judge what they're reading if you can't.
Everybody does, don't they? You know?
But
he's got an e-reader. What is he reading? Something dodgy.
You can't see it. Exactly. Well, all right, that's true.
But actually, no. But I mean, the serious point. I remember talking to an American teacher years ago, and she said to me, a head teacher in a school in Mississippi, and she said, you know, one of the biggest determinants of how well we think a 5-year-old is going to progress at this school is whether there are books in the house. Now, it doesn't have to be, you know, 200 books. But it has to be a few real books because it means somebody in the house reads, and that's an important determinant of how a child will perform.
I helped a young child to read who had a very kind of difficult home life, and the first time I gave her a book, and she was 6, she didn't know which side to open. And it was very, very sad. But she learned in about 3 months, this child was reading fluently. So it's just the opportunity, really.
But does it matter that much these days with e-readers and, you know, you can read books online and all the rest of it?
But no, she
I mean, are
couldn't
we terribly old-fashioned in our attachment
I'm sure
to
we're
actual...
very old-fashioned.
Yeah, exactly. We're
And I'm
attached
really
to
glad we
actual
are very
physical
old-fashioned.
books. Well, yeah, you know, I'm very much in favour of, you know, newspapers as well, you know, something you can pick up and read. But, you know, it's not that kids necessarily aren't reading, I guess. They're reading...
Yeah, but I don't think you
online.
give a child the Hungry Caterpillar on an e-reader. That's just my suggestion.
True.
It wouldn't work
Yeah,
properly.
yeah.
You know, if you've got to get people started.
Yeah, I agree, and I wonder. I don't know if I'm all right. It's the same with comics. I mean, that's the thing with most kids. A lot of kids start out with comics, but of course, again, there's only the Beano left these days, anyway, isn't it? Well, Dandy went online a few years ago. I remember that.
Oh, right.
Well, but if you're reading it, does it? I don't know. Is the simple answer.
I think it's really
not
important.
ideal for a pundit, is it? To say I don't know.
It's really important.
On that happy cultural note, we're going to leave it there. That's it for the papers. Thanks to Yasmin and James. And a reminder, we take a look at tomorrow's front pages every evening at 10:40 here on BBC News.